All righty. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us at our third session here at our second annual State of the People Conference. My name is John Katt. I'm the Director of Technology, Development, and Data here at the Public Advocate's Office. And I am really excited to introduce the third session topic around technology and innovation and how the Public Advocate's Office sees these tools and processes as being necessary for building an equitable and inclusive New York City. And so I'm also joined today by Anthony Jameson from CivStart and Noel Hidalgo from Beta NYC, our local civic tech warriors. And I want to just thank them for joining me in this presentation, but also in our work around technology and innovation. And I will be throwing to them once we get to their sections here of our short presentation. In our session here today around technology and innovation, we're going to go through a short presentation on how we see these tools and technology and the innovation process specifically in solving the community problems that New Yorkers are facing every day, and how we believe that the user, specifically our constituents, need to be brought back to the table in the design and implementation of these tools and technologies. So with that being said, I'll kind of get us into, from the OPA side, where we see technology and tools and how they play this vital role, even for an office such as ours in advocating for New Yorkers. And so innovation we see as more than just this buzzword that startups love to use and coming up with the next big thing. And we see this more so as a mindset and a process that should be particularly constructed with the user and constituent in mind, so that they can utilize together in partnership with government and startups and community organizations. They can participate in the process of coming up with the next ideas of government technologies and how they are going to serve our constituency across the host of issue areas, whether that's housing or education or food equity. We see innovation and the process by which you go from a problem statement to an end solution as needing to be thought of completely differently so that it centers New Yorkers in that process. And technology is something that does span more than just the website that you're watching this live stream on. It spans more so than the vaccine website that all New Yorkers are absolutely needing to get us back to a full and operational New York City. Technology is involved ever increasingly in all government services. And so we see, spanning both hardware and software, the need to include community members more so in the process when the city especially is thinking about implementing these new technologies. And a great example of this is a recent implementation of a technology solution in the form of the COVID vaccine website that needed to include the necessary demographic and target users in the process of designing that platform and tool so that it could best serve the demographic that it was needed for. And so when we talk about technology implementation, for too long, government has focused on the immediate problem and a construct that is outdated, in our opinion, and it really needs to be broadened to include more representation from the community, but also broadened so that the process by which these technology solutions are even being implemented, the community has the necessary input and transparency to ensure that these solutions are working for all New Yorkers. And then finally, I've been talking about, including New Yorkers a lot in this process, and that's where we see public discourse and involvement as a vital component for any technology or innovation implementation here in New York City. And so that is a key focus that our office is going to be looking at in the coming months when we will engage with New Yorkers across a broad spectrum of listening sessions to hear your stories and hear your narratives on the ways in which you have come across and engaged with technology in New York City, and using those stories and narratives together with community and our partners to build the actual problem statements that we should be building solutions for. And so, where does technology and innovation play a role now in government? And I will say New York City has ever increasingly tried to put the user in front of this process, and we would definitely commend things such as the open data law or the CTO's office as being great first steps in the path towards making sure that the tech-powered everything that is coming in New York City and government services is done in a way that it includes New Yorkers. And so government services, tech-powered everything, how does new technology get implemented, and where the community involved are the three tenets that we're looking to highlight throughout the listening sessions moving forward, but also just in general as we look towards engaging with our government partners and our constituency on implementing technology and innovation. With all of that being said, I would love to turn it over to Anthony from CivStart to go into some of the ways that their group have seen these tools and the innovation process in work within government and community partners. So I'll turn it over to Anthony.
Thank you, John. New York is clearly a leader in this space. And as one of the co-founders and CEO of CivStart, I have the opportunity to work with local governments across the country. So I want to bring a little perspective on what we are seeing in local governments and some of what we hope to see going forward. Internal innovation is one important method that we've seen being used by local, state, and federal governments to build workplaces that attract and retain top creative talent towards developing and improving civic tech. There have been some successful models such as New Urban Mechanics in Boston and Smart PDX out of Portland, Oregon. But internal innovation comes up against the real need for local governments to not take huge risk with the public treasury or public trust, which is where ecosystem building comes in. This approach to innovation recognizes that there are civic-minded leaders in the local nonprofit and business communities that we can solve bigger problems if we come together. Unfortunately, we often see the same players, which to say are a lot of white men, and more recent attempts to have this to make it more exclusive at the core was to bring in underrepresented faces. But inclusivity should inspire us to do more than just bring underrepresented faces to the room. It should inspire us to open the room to diverse resident needs and ideas. We only know of a few experiments in this approach, which Beta NYC will talk a little bit more about later. And we are excited to be a part of this project with New York City's Office of the Public Advocate on bringing innovation to and from the people. Now, to get into a little bit more specifics of what CivStart does to help local governments, our goal is to de-risk these innovations and speed up the adoption rate of appropriate technologies. The method we have used when engaging governments is to conduct listening sessions and compile challenges identified. Once completed, we work with the local governments to prioritize the challenges and find the best solutions. In our work, we seek out startup solutions because we believe in the benefits that small, agile, narrowly focused, innovative companies, often led by diverse entrepreneurs, can bring to local governments. We also know that startups are often much more willing to do free or low-cost pilot projects for local governments, allowing everyone, including the residents, benefiting from the solutions to test it out before encountering much of the risk. And this is the overall picture of what we hope to accomplish. Most governments operate with the questions of what is probable. In other words, what is the least risky option? We are trying to shift what the local government technology landscape looks like so that we can shift that mindset. A professor at Harvard's Business School, Mitch Weiss, has a good term for this new mindset, and it's called possibility government. Possibility government is the pursuit of new programs and services that may or may not work out. It is typically in the realm of entrepreneurs where the ideas may fail, but the ones that succeed can be transformative. Because of the challenges of COVID-19, the persistent social injustices and climate change, local governments are at an inflection point where they have to be bold and think outside the box. That means that we need to embrace the possibility that people, through their local governments, can have real and meaningful change to make a better city for everyone. And on that note, I'll pass it on to our partners who will bring the people-centered experience at Beta NYC, Noel Hidalgo.
Hello, my name is Noel or Noel, and I'm the executive director of a public interest technology organization here in New York City called Beta NYC. And we started off on a journey many years ago as a meetup. We were a bunch of concerned citizens interested in understanding how technology and data could be used to bring about a more accountable government. This was back in 2008 when seemingly the whole mobile revolution was taking place. You know, we were getting these really sophisticated smart devices in our pockets. These glass slate tablets were arriving in stores. The internet was becoming ubiquitous because of advances in high-speed internet access through our cell phones and through mobile connections. And on top of that, cloud-based services like Amazon's AWS and social media tools like Facebook and Twitter and Flickr were all reaching a level of maturity where we as technologists and kind of interested policymakers were wondering, how do we take all of these tools and make our government more accountable in this digital era? And through that process, we found a city council member. Her name was Gail Brewer, who is now the Manhattan Borough president, who had introduced a piece of legislation that was talking about making all of the city's data open and available for free. And that piece of legislation actually grows from about 20 years prior to that, a conversation around COPIC, which is a commission that the public advocate oversees. And so the commission was all about making data and information available to the general public. And because of issues, COPIC was not being fully resourced. And so now Gail wanted to make a piece of legislation that would force the mayor's office to share data all the time. And we said that was a great idea because of all of these tools and resources. We want to see this piece of legislation happen as well. So we started meeting up, we started organizing, we started meeting with elected officials. And through that process, we discovered that there were many more things than just an issue around data. We needed to talk about the systems, the technology systems, the policy, the privacy, basic literacy of like, how do you turn essentially government information into data? And that has led us on a path of discovery, of figuring out who in New York City needs to be educated around these technological terms, as well as standing up processes and programs where we can implement and change and modernize our society. Can we get to the next slide? Great. We did this through this thing called the People's Roadmap, where we first started off identifying a core set of issues that we wanted to explore. So in 2012, we started hosting meetups and started asking people, if you had the opportunity to change something in New York, how would you use technology, data, and design? Through 6 listening sessions in all 5 boroughs, we engaged a couple hundred New Yorkers and had them propose new ideas and new policies. Then a small volunteer team sat down and started editing and writing and kind of turning these policy ideas and post-it notes into proposals. And that ended up with the People's Roadmap to a Digital New York City, or you can find this at nycroadmap.us. And that became not only our community document where we identified our mission, vision, and values, we also identified concrete pieces of legislation and policy that we wanted to introduce. Can we get to the next slide? One of those ideas was building a program where we could educate the next generation of public interest technology leaders. And so in partnership now with Gail Brewer, who's now the Manhattan Borough President, we've been able to educate CUNY undergraduate students and to provide them a professional talent pipeline so that way they can understand the realm of using technology, data, and design. Once we've trained these fellows, we then use them to help us go out and do open data trainings. And next week is Open Data Week, where you'll find over 100 different events around open data. And you'll also find our fellows doing introductory open data courses. So you can find out those events at open-data.nyc. Now, these fellows have also helped us produce 3 sets of outcomes. If we can get to the next slide. Those 3 set of outcomes are data analysis. So we train our fellows essentially to become data analysts, and they go into the city's open data portal. They research complex questions. They engage people through a consulting process, and they produce a data analysis. They've also gone through the process of building a handful of tools that are really oriented to meeting real world needs. Those real world needs, for example, are a comprehensive tool to see all 311 service requests based upon geography. And so you can go to a tool called BoardStat on beta.nyc under our product listings, and you can see all of the various tools, and one of them is BoardStat, where you have this comprehensive listing of 311 service requests and their statuses. You can also take a look at tools like Boundaries Map, which enables people to see what are the political and administrative boundaries, so that way you know who to contact based upon the issue or condition or the problem that you want to address. We've also come up with some pretty other comprehensive tools that are all listed on our website, beta.nyc. And lastly, we're able to turn our fellows around and help us conduct research, which is all part of this big process, which is we first need to figure out like what problems are we trying to solve, and then let's propose solutions, or at least start the process of figuring out what those solutions look like. And throughout our history, we've always engaged the public. And so our research tends to advocate for more civic engagement, more inclusivity, and bringing in the people's voices into the conversation, because these are the users of government services, and their voices need to be heard because their problems need to be met. And we can't do that in a vacuum. And so this is just an example of the work that Beta NYC does through beta.nyc. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to joining the Public Advocate's Office and CivStart in regards to doing a series of listening tours where we can revamp the People's Roadmap. Now back to John.
Amazing. Thank you. And I think at this point, I've heard quite a bit throughout, and I'm realizing after my own portion that I probably mentioned like centering the user and centering constituents a dozen or so times, and I heard that in both of your presentations. And it sounds redundant, but it really will honestly go a long way in fixing many of the problems that we see when it comes to the issues of government implementing a technology or using a specific data set and not including the constituent in the design process. And with that being said, we were definitely getting some questions in from our website and Facebook, but I wanted to start with some framing questions. And these framing questions have a lot to do with this listening tour that we're talking about, where we're going to go to all New Yorkers and hear their stories and their opinions and ideas on technology and innovation. And so the first question I'll pose to the group here is, what values do you see in a framework to reimagine how New York City uses technology and innovation? And I won't flavor it with my own, but I'll start with Noel. What values do you see in a framework to reimagine how New York City uses technology and innovation?
Well, we are, I think, as Anthony pointed out in his notes, we are at the cusp of kind of like this new era. This new era has to include the voices of constituents and has to make government more responsive and reactive than tools and processes have been traditionally introduced in the 20th century. And so there's actually this is a process called service design, which not only looks at how the thing functions, but how it works, and how it meets the needs of a broad set of users. And so I think and you know, this is kind of counter to previous thinking where I don't know if you want to call it as a paternal level thinking or a white man's burden, or a patriarchal thinking, which is, we know what the solution is to all of these problems. Let's just deploy a solution that's going to serve everybody's needs. You know, the reality is that there are a diverse set of needs across a broad spectrum of New Yorkers who need government services, and we need government to be reactive to all of those needs. And we have to be agile, and we have to have the ability to adapt. And so I think a core value of us in this next phase of government services, in light of the injustices that we have to address, and the fact that we are staring at a climate crisis, we need to bake in service design, we need to bake in agility and flexibility, and we need to do this with empathy. If we don't start building government services with those core values, I'm not sure we will have a government at the end of this particular century.
That's interesting. And Anthony, any specific values that come to mind when you think about how New York City or generally a local government looks to build a framework to use technology and innovation?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have too much to offer on top of what Noel said there. I think he hit a lot of the points that I would want to tackle, but I just wanted to add on that what we're doing here today and what we're trying to do with the Public Advocate's Office is we need to also make sure that everything's inclusive. We need to, and having these listening sessions, but not just inclusive in terms of how we come to identifying to solving these challenges, but inclusive in the type of technologies we're even engaging with, right? We need to make sure that some of these technologies out there are built with a particular group of people in their framework. And so when they're deployed, they're really excluding a large majority of the diverse especially in New York City, how diverse New York City is. You can't have technologies like that being deployed. So I think the steps by bringing in the community first, and that's typically what we don't do, and that's why we're so excited to be working with the Public Advocate's Office in Beta NYC, who's really like a leader in doing this engagement component with the citizens. We think that is what a lot of governments should be doing. They should be engaging their citizens before they roll out anything, because if you do that, you don't want to. You see, you have like the vaccine websites that come out and they're having all the problems right now. Or I like to use an example, one from a while back is the healthcare.gov website, how that fiasco, if we went to the people and understood what they needed for before we rolled out a solution, then we would have got it right the first time, or we would have got something close enough to what we needed for those people. So just making sure that the framework is as inclusive as possible. That's what I would add to this, to your points.
Gotcha. And values that we see across the board in how New York City or any local government should be thinking about creating a path forward in any rebuilding with using technology and innovation. The goal of centering the user is great. And I think a lot of my fellow colleagues in government and even partners on the ground that's a great sentiment to have. We see a lot of questions coming in now from website or Facebook around how specifically do you see the community getting involved in this process? Where do you see a community member having a meaningful impact on, say, the design of a vaccine website or even something as big as healthcare.gov and a service like that? What specifically, tangibly, does involvement look like at the community level?
Well, I wish I could share this URL with everyone, but I will say Google civic service design tools and tactics. And so what is civic service design and how does that get implemented? Well, it's actually a playbook that you first start off with. And then how is that implemented? It's by figuring out that all of the digital tools that are being produced have a method to measure engagement. So not only can you measure engagement and look at usability issues within the tool, but you also have to have user engagement conversations and studies with people either virtually or in person. Now, I understand we're in the middle of a pandemic and it's really hard to get people into a room, but you can still do usability studies in a park, in people's congregate settings, whether it's a NYCHA development or an apartment building. It forces government to go out and be directly finding the either targeted population or a vulnerable population and asking them explicitly, we're making this tool for you. How do you see this tool working with you? And so there's a lot of tactics that are used to get there, but it is what it looks like physically. It's about government actually going out and asking the question, the thing that we made for you, does it work for you? And that is building with the community and not for the community.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a mantra that I think, again, we like to use a lot, and but it's important to reiterate the importance because it will avert so many of the problems that we end up seeing down the line in any form of design catastrophe or technology implementation. Anthony, I'd be interested, I know CivStart particularly hasn't kind of seen this side so far of specifically the constituents, but from conversations and work with governments internally, how would you say up to now governments have kind of been addressing this? Because obviously governments aren't just like blindly trying to implement XYZ technology. Like there's a process by which they're thinking, the constituent might end up using this technology and it would be useful. What kind of plays into those conversations as they currently stand?
Well, again, I would like to go back to the term I was using, probable government and possibility government. When interacting, it's not every government. There's definitely governments that are different, and it varies from small to large. But a lot of governments are looking. They're not trying to take a risk. They're trying to play it safe. They want to, what can they do within like their budget constraints, within the allotted human capital they have to deploy solutions. What do they already know? What do they already know how to use? They're not willing to, go out there and venture into the unknown too often. And so, I mean, one thing I would say what COVID has forced upon a lot of governments is that you have to think outside of outside your realm. You have to think. You have to also put yourself in the shoes of your constituents a little bit more. Because if you put out something, people are going to die. You got to make sure you put out something where you're saving lives. So what we've been witnessing, at least now from when we've been engaging governments, that governments are very open to seeing what they can possibly do. And outside of what they know, they'll come to us and say, they might come to us with a very narrow thought process of like something, but as soon as we start digging deep and having these listening sessions and then probing them a little bit more, they open up to all the other things that can help them achieve those goals. So what I would say is that the constituent piece, I think, just ensures that governments are doing the things that is needed for their communities. I would love for all governments to go the route that New York City is looking, that the Public Advocate's Office and how Beta NYC operates, and not all governments do that. But I think you need to bring them both together. I think there has to be where you're listening to what your communities want and what their needs are before you roll out something. And if you do that, then you're gonna 9 out of 10 times you're gonna have a service that actually works and delivers.
Exactly. And I think, like you mentioned, we would love to see these conversations and these thought processes in governments inside of New York City and outside. And I think that's where our office, the Public Advocate's Office, kind of plays a unique role that you don't see in very many other cities. And that's where I'm very excited to see how this office, which has historically played that role, not necessarily in the technology or innovation space beforehand, can now kind of broaden into this space to ensure that proactiveness is the nature of the conversation, and we can get to these problems before we have a service or a website or a piece of technology that ends up causing more harm because they were too careful and because they didn't include the constituent in that design process. And so we have just a couple more minutes here, and I want to round out some of the questions I'm seeing from the audience so far. A lot are being mentioned around how they can specifically get involved in this innovation project, how they can participate in the listening sessions, what does that look like? And so while we don't have a specific website that you can go to right now to help get involved with that, I would say generally be in tune with our office, advocate.nyc.gov, beta.nyc, and keeping in tune, because this is something that we're actively working, and being mindful that we have to structure this in a reality that you can't all come together, and we want to make this as meaningful as possible. With that being said, I'm wondering if, with a time allotted left, if there's anything else that either Noel or Anthony you wanted to cover before we closed.
Yeah, I will specifically say, if you go to beta.nyc and beta.nyc, And then look for community. You will find that we have a Facebook group. We have a community Slack and an open Slack channel. We also have a meetup, and we use those three tools to communicate our community events, which is where we will be advertising future engagement with the public advocate and all of these listening sessions. So those are the three channels that you can tune into. And also follow us on Twitter.
Amazing. With that being said, I want to thank both panelists for being here. Thank CivStart, thank Beta NYC. Also thank the amazing ASL interpreters who have really added a level of accessibility to events that is very needed in this world of remote and telecommuting, both ASL and closed captioning available. And I want to assure that any questions that we did not get to specifically in this, my department and our office will definitely be reaching out to engage and continue this conversation. This is only the beginning of the conversation. This session was meant to jumpstart a conversation and engagement with New Yorkers, with advocacy groups inside and outside of technology. And I understand that these subject matters can be buzzwordy many of times. There's a lot of jargon, and it is a daunting thing to talk about what does meaningful design look like in a website, and why should that matter for me. But I am excited to have these partners in broaching that conversation. So this is a short break. Anthony.
Just one thing I would say, I just want to throw out there for all of the people listening is that you can start thinking about some of the challenges that your community and your neighborhoods are facing. I would say that would be a good starting point. Start thinking about those things that you can share with us.
Definitely start thinking about those things. Yeah.
And the last thing that I will promote is Open Data Week kicks off this weekend. So if you're interested in understanding technology, data, and design and its intersection across the city, take a look at open-data.nyc. You will find many others who are interested in solving these problems and using technology, data, and design to do that. And this is a global conversation. And so also part of the Open Data Week conversation is this event called MozFest, where if you look in the calendar, you'll be able to find this conversation happening at a global level.
Amazing. And I will say, like Anthony mentioned, now is the time to start sharing ideas. We do have a hashtag right now on Twitter and Facebook and the platforms. What is your people's NYC? So definitely start tagging them to there. We're going to be following that to collect these ideas and these stories and these narratives to build the conversation upon. So I thank the partners for being here. I thank the Public Advocate's Office, and definitely be in tune at 1:15. We'll be having our keynote address, the Attorney General for the state of New York, and our two state U.S. senators will also be joining us for some quick words. So definitely be in tune for that. Thank you all.